The colony was small compared to the vast powers of the galaxy, but for the people who lived there it was everything. Their world was filled with green valleys, quiet rivers, and skies that glowed with two suns. Families had built their homes over generations, raising children, working the land, and dreaming of a future that seemed peaceful and safe. They believed their corner of space was far from the wars and rivalries that plagued other civilizations. For many years they thought they were too small, too unimportant to draw the attention of greater powers. That belief shattered the moment the hostile empire arrived. The enemy came without warning. They were known across the stars for their cruelty, for leaving nothing but ashes behind. The first signs were shadows in the sky, dark ships blocking out the light of the suns, hovering silently like predators watching their prey. Fear spread quickly among the colony. The elders who remembered old warnings trembled, and the young who had never seen war felt their hearts fill with dread. Rumors spread through the streets. The empire wanted their resources, their world, their very lives. At first, the colonists tried to talk. They sent messages of peace, offering what little they had if only the empire would spare them. But no answer came. Instead, more warships appeared, surrounding their planet like a cage. Hope began to fade. People whispered in hushed voices that the empire did not want trade or treaties. They wanted conquest, and conquest meant destruction. The leaders of the colony gathered in a hall that night, their faces pale and heavy with despair. Mothers clutched their children, fathers tried to stay brave, and the elders wept quietly. They knew they had no army, no defense strong enough to face what was coming. Their ships were small and old, built for farming and travel, not for battle. Their weapons were almost nothing compared to the firepower of the empire. To resist would mean certain death. To surrender would only delay the same fate. Desperation grew heavier with every passing hour. People began to argue. Some wanted to hide underground, hoping the empire would leave a few survivors. Others believed they should fight with whatever tools they had, even if it meant dying. But one voice reminded them of a last option, the old practice of sending a signal into the void. Long ago, their ancestors had taught that when all seemed lost, a call could be sent across the stars. It was a gamble, a message cast into endless space, hoping anyone would hear it. The decision was made. Engineers and scientists worked through the night, building the strongest signal they could create. Families gathered around the towers as the device was powered up, its lights glowing like a beacon of hope against the darkness. The people knew the truth no one might hear, or worse, the wrong kind of power might answer. But they had nothing left to lose. When the moment came, silence fell across the colony. The message was spoken in trembling voices, translated into every language they could manage. It was not a demand, not a bargain, not even a command. It was a plea. The words were simple: we beg for mercy. Our world faces destruction. If you can hear us, please help us. Do not let us be erased. The signal shot into the sky, breaking free of their world, racing past stars and planets, crossing the void that separated civilizations. For a brief moment, as the tower went dark, the people felt hope flicker inside them. Perhaps somewhere, far beyond the stars they could see, there was someone who would care. Perhaps another race would understand what it meant to face death and still cry out for life. Yet fear remained. What if no one answered? What if the signal never reached a listening ear? In the days that followed, life on the colony became a waiting game. Every sound from the sky made people look upward. Every flicker of light made them wonder if it was the empire preparing to strike, or if help was finally coming. Children asked their parents if they would survive. Parents answered with gentle lies, hiding their own fear. The empire's ships grew bolder, closer. Entire cities could see the shadows of the warships passing overhead. At night, their engines glowed like evil stars, reminding the people of the doom that hovered above them. Supplies began to run low. Families shared their food, water, and shelter, trying to stay alive long enough for the signal to be answered. But deep inside, many feared no help would come. Still, the act of sending the message gave them something to hold on to. They whispered prayers to the stars, asking the unknown listeners to be kind, to be strong, to save them before it was too late. The colony's leaders gathered every day to watch the skies, their hearts breaking as the empire tightened its grip. They knew the end was near. But in those final days of silence, something remarkable happened among the people. Strangers helped each other, families shared their last meals, and hope, fragile as it was, kept them united. They had cried out into the endless dark, and though no answer had yet returned, they still believed in the possibility of mercy. They still believed that somewhere someone would hear, and so the colony waited, standing on the edge of destruction, their signal carrying their plea through the stars. The Empire circled closer, their engines growling like beasts ready to strike, yet the people refused to surrender their last hope. They had sent their voice into the universe, and all they could do was wait to see if the universe would answer. When the desperate signal from the colony finally reached Earth, it was not ignored for even a moment. Across countless light years, the message of fear and mercy arrived in human hands, and the reaction was immediate. Humanity had a reputation throughout the stars that no one could deny. They were not like the softer species born in calm worlds with gentle climates. Earth itself was a place of danger, a planet of storms, predators, disasters, and endless challenges. From birth, humans had been forced to fight against their world simply to survive. That was why the galaxy called them Deathworlders. Other species whispered about Earth in both fear and respect. Stories were told of humans climbing mountains in deadly cold, swimming through violent seas, walking through deserts of burning heat, and still living where other beings would perish in moments. Their planet had taught them one lesson above all: survival required strength, and strength required struggle. Every generation of humanity carried that lesson in their blood. So when the call for help reached them, they did not gather for long debates, and they did not send words of comfort. Humans acted. The leaders of Earth ordered their fleets to prepare. Massive shipyards floating in orbit and hidden in deep space came alive with activity. Alarms sounded, hangars opened, and crews rushed into position. Warships that had been silent for years roared to life, their engines glowing with power, their weapons being armed and checked. Soldiers who had lived their entire lives training for the possibility of conflict were called to duty. They packed their gear, checked their weapons, and boarded the ships without hesitation. To humanity, answering a call for mercy was not just about kindness. It was about a promise that no one who cried for help would ever be left alone. But humans were not gentle saviors. Their history was carved from wars, revolutions, and endless battles for freedom. They understood that true protection came not from soft words, but from overwhelming strength. And so their response to the colony's plea was not a speech. It was an army. The fleets that launched from Earth were unlike anything the colony could have imagined. They were titans of steel, ships built to withstand the void of space and the fury of war. Each one carried hundreds, sometimes thousands of humans, soldiers hardened by training, by history, and by the very world that had shaped them. Their weapons were capable of tearing apart enemy vessels, their shields strong enough to hold against entire armadas. As the engines ignited, the stars themselves seemed to tremble. Inside those ships, the soldiers prepared themselves. They were young and old, men and women, veterans of past battles and new recruits eager to prove themselves. Yet they all shared one thing: the spirit of Earth. Some whispered prayers, some sang old songs of war, and others sat in silence, their eyes steady and their hands calm. They knew what awaited them: danger, destruction, and death. But they also knew why they were going. Somewhere out there, a colony of frightened people had begged for mercy. Humanity would bring that mercy, though it would come in the form of fire and steel. As the fleets left Earth, the people of the planet watched from below. Families stood together, gazing at the sky, watching the warships rise. They knew their loved ones might not return, but they also knew this was the way of humanity. To ignore a cry for help was unthinkable. Better to fight and risk death than to stand by while the helpless were destroyed. And so Earth gave its answer not with hesitation, not with fear, but with unity. The journey through space was long, but the humans did not waste the time. Training continued inside the ships. Soldiers drilled in the halls, sharpened their skills, and prepared their weapons. Commanders studied maps of the enemy empire, planning strategies and predicting their moves. Pilots checked their ships again and again, making sure no failure would occur in battle. Engineers worked tirelessly, repairing, reinforcing, and upgrading every system. The fleet moved like a living creature, each part working with the others, prepared for the storm ahead. Among the humans, there was no doubt about what needed to be done. The enemy that threatened the colony would not listen to peace or reason. They understood only power, and Earth was ready to give them that power in full measure. Where others might hesitate, where others might fear to act, humans pressed forward. They had been shaped by hardship, trained by struggle, and tested by countless trials. In their minds, this mission was simple: Protect the innocent no matter the cost. The galaxy knew this about humanity, and many species trembled at the thought of Earth's warships moving into battle. The sight of a human fleet on the horizon meant that something terrible was about to happen. For enemies, it meant destruction. For allies, it meant salvation. And for those caught in the middle, it meant witnessing a force unlike any other in the universe. That was why humanity's name carried such weight. Deathworlders, survivors, fighters, rescuers, destroyers. All these words belonged to them. As the fleet drew closer to the colony, the soldiers looked out from their windows at the endless stars. They thought of the voices in that signal, the fear, the desperation, the plea for mercy. Some imagined the children crying as enemy ships hovered above their world. Others thought of the families hiding underground praying for safety. Those thoughts filled the humans not with sorrow but with fire. They would not let such voices go unanswered. They would fight and they would win because that was what humanity did best. The warships pressed on, silent and unstoppable. Each one a symbol of Earth's will, each one carrying the weight of a promise. The colony had cried out for help and Earth had answered. The galaxy would soon see the meaning of that answer. For when Deathworlders moved to protect, they did so with the full fury of a species that had never known an easy life. They did not bring peace in gentle forms. They brought it through strength, through fire, through war. And so, with engines blazing and weapons armed, the human fleets cut through the darkness of space. They were not coming to negotiate. They were not coming to beg or plead. They were coming to stand between the helpless and the destroyers. They were coming to show the galaxy once again why Earth's name was spoken with both fear and respect. The signal from the colony had reached humanity, and humanity had given its answer. That answer was written in steel, in fire, and in the unbreakable will of those who had survived their own death world. And once the fleets arrived, the universe would remember the truth. When humans heard a cry for mercy, they did not hesitate. They came with warships. The enemy had grown arrogant long before they reached the colony. They had destroyed countless worlds, crushed countless people, and left only ruins behind them. To them, the colony was nothing more than another easy target, another helpless people to conquer without effort. Their fleets were vast, their weapons powerful, and their confidence unshakable. As they circled the skies of the colony, their commanders sneered at the thought of resistance. In their minds, the victory was already theirs. On the ground, the colonists trembled. They had seen other planets fall to this empire, and they believed they were next. The warships above were massive, their shadows stretching across entire cities. Their engines growled like predators waiting to pounce, and the colonists could do nothing but wait for the end. Families clung to each other, praying that their desperate signal into the stars might still bring an answer before it was too late. Yet the enemy never doubted. They expected screams, surrender, and destruction. They expected no fight at all. But then everything changed. The first sign was not sound, but light. Far above the colony's skies, pinpoints of brilliance appeared, growing brighter with every passing moment. At first, the invaders thought it was a natural phenomenon, a trick of the stars. But soon the truth became clear. Dozens, then hundreds of human warships broke through the void, engines blazing, their silhouettes sharp and terrifying against the darkness of space. The Deathworlders had arrived. The enemy's confidence cracked instantly. They had heard the stories of Earth, whispered warnings from other empires and colonies, but they had never faced humans directly. Now those stories stood before them in the form of massive fleets, armed with weapons that glowed like the hearts of suns. The sky above the colony seemed to ignite as human ships roared into formation. To the invaders, it was a nightmare. To the colonists watching from below, it was both salvation and terror. The battle began with thunder. Human ships opened fire with precision and fury. Blinding beams of energy cut through the enemy lines, tearing apart warships that had once seemed invincible. Missiles streaked across the blackness of space, exploding with force that lit up the skies like storms. Enemy shields shattered, enemy hulls split open, and in moments ships that had come to conquer were reduced to flaming wreckage. The colonists on the ground could only stare. For them, it was as if the heavens themselves had turned into fire. Every explosion shook their world. Every flash of light cast long shadows across the land. They watched as Earth's warships moved with impossible coordination, their formations tight and unyielding, their weapons never ceasing. The humans did not hesitate, did not falter, and did not stop. Where the enemy had expected weakness, they found overwhelming strength. To the colonists, the sight was both beautiful and horrifying. These were their saviors, yet their salvation looked like destruction. Cities shook under the echo of war. Skies burned red and gold, and the air vibrated with the force of battle. Children hid their faces in their parents' arms, too afraid to look, while others watched wide-eyed at the impossible sight. The Deathworlders had answered their cry for help, but they had answered in a way no one could have imagined. The enemy tried to fight back. Their fleets unleashed every weapon they had, pouring fire upon the humans in desperate waves. But Earth's warships were forged for survival. Their shields absorbed the blasts, their armor held strong, and their counterattacks ripped through the enemy without mercy. The humans had come prepared for war, and their every move showed it. In the chaos, enemy commanders shouted orders, trying to regroup, trying to find some weakness in the human lines. But no weakness appeared. Every attempt was crushed before it could begin. Where enemy ships gathered, human fleets struck with devastating force. Where enemies tried to retreat, humans pursued, cutting them down with ruthless precision. The empire that had once believed itself unstoppable now found itself trapped in a storm it could not escape. For the colonists, the emotions were tangled and heavy. They were saved, yes, but they were also witnesses to a kind of violence they had never imagined. To see Earth's fleets in action was to understand why they were called Deathworlders. Their power was not delicate, not gentle, but fierce and overwhelming. The colony's people felt their hearts pound as they realized what kind of allies had come to their rescue. This was mercy, but it was mercy delivered in the shape of war. The battle raged on, each passing hour tearing the invaders apart piece by piece. Human warships pressed forward without pause, their engines glowing like burning stars. The sky never stopped flashing and the ground never stopped shaking. The colonists saw enemy ships fall one after another, their wreckage burning as it streaked across the atmosphere. The invaders who had once promised to wipe out the colony now faced the same fate themselves. Finally, the end came. What had begun as an arrogant invasion ended as a desperate slaughter. The few enemy ships that survived tried to flee, their engines firing at full strength, but the humans gave no quarter. They chased them down, striking them from the sky until nothing was left but silence and the distant glow of ruined vessels. When the last blast faded and the skies grew quiet, the colonists dared to breathe again. Their world still stood, though the heavens above were scarred by smoke and debris. They had been saved, yet the memory of what they had seen would never leave them. For they understood now what it meant when humanity answered a call for help. To the frightened colony, it was awe-inspiring to see such power turned against their enemies. They were alive only because of Earth's fleets, only because the Deathworlders had chosen to fight for them. Yet it was terrifying, too. The humans were saviors, but they were also destroyers. Mercy had come, yes, but it had worn the face of fire and steel. The invaders had expected an easy victory, but instead they had been crushed beyond recognition. The colony remained scarred but free, and in the hearts of the people one truth became clear. When humanity fought, the sky itself turned into fire, and no enemy could stand against them. When the final enemy ship exploded in the blackness of space, the battle was over. The invaders who had once filled the skies with their power and arrogance were gone. Not one remained to continue the conquest. The colony had been saved, but the silence that followed did not feel like peace. It was heavy, almost crushing, as if the very air held the weight of what had just happened. The people came out slowly from their shelters and underground bunkers, their eyes wide as they looked at the world around them. What they saw filled them with both relief and sorrow. Their cities still stood, but they were scarred. Buildings that once shone with light were blackened by fire, their walls cracked and their roofs torn apart by the force of falling debris. Some homes still smoldered, sending trails of smoke into the already darkened skies. Streets were broken and scattered with rubble, signs of the thunder that had rained from above. The colony was free, but it was no longer the same. The war had passed over it like a storm, leaving marks that no one could erase. Where children once played, now stood piles of stone and shattered glass. Fields that had grown food were scorched by the falling wreckage of enemy ships. The air smelled of smoke and burned metal, and the sky was veiled by ash that dimmed the suns. For a moment, the people stood in silence, listening. After hours of deafening explosions, screaming engines, and crashing thunder, there was only quiet. It should have been comforting, but instead it felt strange, almost frightening. The silence reminded them of what had been lost, of how close they had come to being erased from existence. Families searched for each other in the ruins, calling names with voices that shook. Tears came easily, not only from fear but also from the deep relief that they were alive. Yet in their hearts, the colonists knew the truth. Their survival had not come from their own strength. It had come from the humans, the Deathworlders who had answered their call. Without them, the colony would already be ash. This truth brought gratitude, but it also brought unease. For the colonists could not forget the way salvation had come to them. It had not been soft. It had not been gentle. It had come in the form of fire raining from the skies, warships blazing with unstoppable force, and enemies being torn apart without mercy. As they walked through the remains of their towns, the people whispered to each other. They spoke of the humans with awe, repeating again and again how powerful they were. But there was fear, too, hidden in their voices. They had seen with their own eyes what humanity's mercy looked like, and it was terrifying. They were alive, yes, but the cost of that survival was carved into every stone, every field, every heart. Children asked their parents why the skies had burned so brightly, why the ground had shaken as if the world itself were angry. Parents struggled to answer, telling them that those were the signs of humans fighting to protect them. Some children nodded, comforted by the idea of such powerful guardians. Others cried, still afraid, for in their young minds the humans seemed just as frightening as the invaders. The elders of the colony gathered and looked upon their world with heavy eyes. They had lived long enough to know that nothing came without cost. Survival had been granted, but innocence had been taken. No one would ever see the sky in the same way again. The stars that once looked peaceful would now remind them of the day warships came, the day fire and thunder filled their lives. The colony was free, but freedom carried scars. In the days that followed, the people worked to rebuild. They cleared rubble from the streets, repaired broken homes, and buried their dead. Every task was filled with both sorrow and determination. They had been given another chance to live, and they would not waste it. Yet as they worked, their minds returned again and again to the humans. Some felt endless gratitude, swearing that the colony owed its very existence to Earth. Others could not help but tremble, remembering the ferocity of the battle and wondering what it would mean if such power ever turned against them. Everywhere they looked, reminders of the humans lingered. Pieces of destroyed enemy ships glowed faintly in the fields. Craters in the ground showed where human weapons had struck with precision. Even the air seemed to carry the echo of the battle. It was as if the colony itself had been marked forever by the presence of the Deathworlders. Still, no one could deny the truth. The colony had been saved. The invaders, who had promised only slavery and death, were destroyed. The people were alive, and that was something worth holding on to. They gathered in the evenings, lighting small fires to bring warmth and comfort. Around those flames, they told each other stories, not of the destruction, but of their survival. They reminded themselves that they had called for help, and someone had answered. In the darkness of despair, that answer mattered most. Yet even as they celebrated life, a shadow of unease remained. Mercy had come, but it had come with fire, steel, and thunder. It was a reminder that in the galaxy, survival was never simple. It was never clean. Sometimes it came at a cost that would linger in memories for generations. The people knew that their world would heal with time. The skies would clear, the fields would regrow, and new homes would rise from the ruins. But deep inside, they also knew that the colony would never truly be the same again, for they had seen what it meant to be saved by humanity. They had seen death turned against their enemies, destruction unleashed in their name. They had been given life, but it had been delivered through war. And that truth, both comforting and terrifying, would remain with them forever. The enemy was gone. The colony was free. Yet the echo of humanity's help lingered in every heart. They had survived, but survival carried a weight heavier than they could have imagined. Their world stood, but it would never again be untouched, never again as innocent as it once had been. They had called for mercy, and mercy had answered. But mercy, when carried by Deathworlders, wore the face of war. The battle was over, but its story had only just begun. Across the galaxy, news traveled fast. Traders carried whispers from system to system, wandering fleets spread tales in hushed voices, and survivors who had witnessed the fire of humanity spoke to anyone who would listen. In a matter of weeks, every starfaring species had heard about what happened at the colony. The Deathworlders had come. They had brought survival, but they had also brought destruction, and now every world had to decide what that meant. Some species looked at Earth with admiration. To them, humanity was a protector unlike any other. When the helpless cried for aid, the humans did not ignore them. They acted. They did not weigh politics, hesitate with councils, or hide behind treaties. They moved with speed and strength, willing to fight when others would only talk. For these species, Earth became a symbol of hope. They believed that as long as humanity lived among the stars, no colony would be completely alone. The Deathworlders would always answer, and their answer meant survival. But admiration was not the only reaction. Other species spoke with fear, their voices trembling whenever Earth was mentioned. They whispered warnings to their people, reminding them that humanity's protection was not soft or clean. Wherever humans went, the sky burned and the ground shook. Their weapons could tear apart fleets, their soldiers fought like storms, and their mercy came wrapped in destruction. These species warned their children to be careful. Calling upon humans might save a life, but it would also change everything forever. The galaxy began to wonder if Earth was a guardian or a monster, and the line between the two was never clear. For the rescued colony, however, the truth was not complicated. They had lived through the fire. They had seen their skies light up with explosions, their homes tremble under the thunder of war, and their world scarred by the wreckage of battle. Yet they had also lived. Families that should have been lost were still together. Children who should have been orphans were still held in their parents' arms. Cities that should have been erased still stood even if they were damaged. For the colony, the memory of that day held only one truth. When Deathworlders answered a call for help, survival was certain. But peace, the gentle peace they had once known, would never return. The people of the colony carried both gratitude and fear in their hearts. They were thankful beyond words, but every time they looked at the scars left behind, they remembered the price of their salvation. They knew they would rebuild. They knew their fields would grow again and their children would laugh once more. Yet they also knew that the world would always carry the shadow of what had happened. Peace had been broken, replaced by a new understanding of survival. And as the story spread, other civilizations listened carefully. Some prepared to welcome humanity as allies, seeing them as shields against the dangers of the galaxy. Others strengthened their defenses, afraid that one day humanity's fire might turn upon them instead. Councils debated endlessly, scholars argued, and warriors trained harder. The galaxy had changed in the space of a single battle, and every species felt it. From that day onward, a new lesson was written into the hearts of the stars. Mercy and war were no longer separate ideas. They had become one. To ask for help from Earth was to invite not only protection, but also destruction. It was to invite warships that turned the sky into fire, soldiers who fought like forces of nature, and a kind of salvation that could never be clean or quiet. The galaxy understood now. To be saved by humans was to live, but to live in a world forever marked by war. The phrase, "send a signal to Earth," began to carry two meanings. For the desperate, it meant hope, the promise that someone would come no matter the danger. But for the cautious, it also meant fear, the warning that once the humans arrived, nothing would be the same again. Some called it a blessing. Others called it a curse. Yet no one could deny its power. Generations would pass, and the memory of that battle would remain. Parents told their children about the day the humans came, describing both the horror and the relief. Songs were written, stories were passed, and the scars of the colony became a lesson to the galaxy. Mercy had been redefined. To the Deathworlders, mercy meant doing whatever it took to make sure the helpless survived, even if it meant burning the heavens and shattering the silence of peace. And so, the galaxy carried this truth like a weight upon its shoulders. Earth was no longer seen as just another world. It was a force unpredictable and unstoppable, protector and destroyer, saviors and warriors. To call upon them was to choose survival over peace, life over innocence. It was to invite fire into the darkness, and to accept that nothing would ever be the same again. From that day forward, the stars themselves seemed to echo the lesson. Mercy and war would forever be remembered as one.